First, the sister queen, Dr. Martha Bireda, told you. Then your brother Daku told you. But both times you heard it, you said, nah, I can't believe that. We've always been taught that the Underground Railroad went north. That's the only Underground Railroad we heard about. But you saying, who in the hell is Dr. Martha Bireda? And who the hell is this Daku person to share this information? And why should we believe anything they say? Dr. John Henry Clark taught us a long time ago. Not only did they colonize Africa and Americas, they colonized information. But we're here to share this information with you again. We're going to keep beating you upside the head with the truth until you at least begin to think in a way that's independent of your slave masters. Now, as much as I can't stand the fact that you won't take any of this information seriously unless a white person tells you, I was happy to come across a white person telling you the same thing that Dr. Martha Bireda told you and your brother Daku told you. And that is that the Underground Railroad started in the South. It went south. They weren't trying to get north. They were trying to get south. But we're happy to be able to bring you information that's going to make you question everything that you've been taught. You keep thinking about this Underground Railroad that we trying to get north in the freezing goddamn cold. We were trying to get south. And we had thousands of Maroons here in the United Snakes of America. All throughout slavery. And we've told you this many times before. We're going to keep telling you this until we hear at least a couple of y'all repeat this information as though it's true. But since we sharing these white folks telling you, maybe you'll start repeating it. You're very hesitant to repeat anything that black people say. But when a white person says something, you say, yep, that validates it. I know Dr. Martha Bireda and Daku been bringing this information for some time now. But Becky and Heather and Susie and Bob and Bill and Larry, now they're saying it, so this information must have some validity to it. Well, I'm just going to have to swallow my pride and share with you that these white people are saying the same thing that we have been telling you. Now, you have to be careful, as the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey taught us, when white people share information with you. As Dr. John Henry Clark taught us, everything that they teach you is meant for European domination, or what I would call white domination. So hopefully you'll be able to accept it, or at least begin to accept this information coming from your slave master. This has been Daku Akabo Wa'akatu.
We're standing in a marsh that once held Fort Mose in St. Augustine, Florida. It was the first free black settlement sanctioned in what's today the United States. Fort Mose was built in 1738 by newly freed people who had escaped from South Carolina plantations where they'd been slaves, and they escaped to Florida and settled here at Fort Mose.
We are actually part of the Underground Railroad Freedom Network. We were the first original destination of an underground railroad. It was actually working in reverse, though, coming from the northern states such as South Carolina and Georgia, heading south into St. Augustine. In 1738, the Spanish decided to start Fort Mose. There were approximately 100 freedom seekers that had arrived, a good mixture of men, women, and children. Part of the Spanish goal was to encourage the once slaves to now come into St. Augustine so that the Spanish would have all that extra labor and they could protect the north side of downtown St. Augustine. It also helped to take away from the British's labor force. If the plantation owners didn't have the labor to work their plantation, then they would become poorer and poorer. In 1740, the British attacked Fort Mose. A general by the name of James Oglethorpe led the attack on Fort Mose. They were concerned that the members of the militia may try to take Georgia or Southern Carolinas, or that they may cause another major uprising amongst the remainders of the black slave community. So they were successful in capturing the fort. Fortunately, all members of the families here at the fort were able to make it to Castillo de San Marcos safely. They stayed there in the town of St. Augustine for 12 years before returning to Fort Mose land. The town of Fort Mose was vacant for approximately 12 years before they decided to rebuild.
The first Fort Mose had been attacked by the English in 1740 and was almost completely destroyed. And that site has been almost completely inundated in the marsh. Fort Mose was actually on this largest island directly behind me. And that's where we began doing excavations in 1985. During the excavations, probably to me the most important things we uncovered were traces in the soil of where the actual fort building had been. We were able to find a pit which, when we followed it out, turned out to be the fort moat, an area with a lot of mud cap that was slightly higher, that was the edge of the curtain walls that had been covered with mud and with prickly pear cactus in the moat and on the top, which would have been a pretty effective deterrent. And we were able to follow that out enough to know that this was Fort Mose, because the fort itself shows up on maps of the period. The fort was a three-sided structure. It was about 65 feet to a side, and it was made of a high earthen embankment. And on the outside of this earthen embankment, like an earthen wall, they had plastered marsh mud, which was really slippery, hard to get up for an enemy. And there was also prickly pear cactus in the moat and also on the top of the wall. So this wall was an unusual shape. The open side that didn't have a wall was along the creek, and so it was protected on that side by the water, and that's where boats came in. The other three sides were this kind of an open square, really, with corner bastions on two sides. But the buildings for the fort were all clustered inside those walls. It was just an area of about 1.5 acres, so it wasn't a huge area. And we're not even certain still whether all of the people in the Mosaic community lived inside the walls or some of them outside in farmland. Some of the other items that were found at Fort Mose were related to military activity, because the men of Mose were in a militia and they fought for the town and the government and their own families. Fort Mose is a really important story for American history in general, because it tells a very different story than what we're used to hearing or reading in traditional textbooks. Most of the traditional stories about African American pasts have concentrated on slavery and being enslaved and living lives of labor. And Fort Mose really represents a very strong self-determination, a willingness to just take things into their own hands and escape at tremendous danger to another place, and really is a flight to freedom. And this is not to say that all of the people who remained in slavery were not determined, but I think this highlights the error of thinking there's a universal sort of experience for Black Americans, when in fact their ancestors were having their own kind of revolution.